memory for a while. Our guests tonight are Jim Dow, the far left, Neil Rachel, Griffin, and Henry Morstein. Mr. Dow is a teacher of photography at the Museum School of Boston. He's a renowned photographer and a award-winner, elected internationally. Neil Rachel teaches at Northeastern University. He's the chair of the photography department there. He's an author and educator and photographer, and is also collected nationally. Arno is a photography professor at UMass in Lowell, author, and many of you here from New England, I'm sure, saw his exhibition at the Portugal. The Saga of Arno Raphael Griffin. Is that the title of your show? Saga.
Yes.
And Henry Morstein, you have a lot of slots on you. Educator, author of so many books. Photography teacher at Rhode Island School of Design. All of these men are photographers in their own right. And the commonality is that Harry Callahan played a very prominent role in their lives. So let's all welcome our authors. I thought what we would do, although most of you, I'm sure, know what Harry Callahan is and his work, I thought that we would start out by having you get to know Harry by his photographs. I tried to give you a broad range. I scanned a few and grabbed a lot off the internet, so forgive me. But I hope it gives you an idea of who the man was. I have no music either. I apologize.
Is that right? Reminded me when I saw the slideshow, you know, there's a pictures that I've seen. And when Harry, I think it was, I'm not sure exactly, I think it was like 1964. We
can't hear back here.
Yeah, the speaker.
1964, 65, he got a grant to travel, but it wasn't enough, so he had a fire sale. And he sold pictures to students at a cut price. And people went up to his house and he would just take out the box and he'd have them. And every single person came back and said, well, you know, the picture that had this or the picture that had that, the well-known picture, there's 20, there's 40, there's 70 versions. That was just the way it was. It was the most productive artist I ever had.
And Jim, you gave me this,
Yeah.
this video that we're playing as the background.
Yeah.
Give us a little history on
Sure.
it.
When I was a first year graduate, one of my fellow students was a guy named Murray Reese, who was, had a background in filmmaking, and he decided to make a movie about Harry. And it's, you know, it's a period piece, let me tell you. But basically, we walked around in the woods with Harry, and then we intercut it with pictures from classes. So you'll maybe recognize some of the usual suspects will come up very, very briefly. But it was basically an homage to Harry, and there was this one student who somehow convinced Harry to let him take a tape recorder to class. The classes would take place at Harry's house and involve a lot of beer and long hours. And Harry would stay up until the last person left, or until Eleanor came down.
And Eleanor was his wife.
Eleanor was his wife. And so this guy recorded every single thing Harry said within 1 year. And so then we got the tapes and cut down to whatever it was, 15 minutes. And then had somebody do a voiceover. But the images are what's fun, just to have it in the background while we're talking. I think it's kind of fun.
Thank you for bringing that.
Sure, my pleasure.
So could I ask all four gentlemen talking through the microphone? Please seal and suck your voice right into them, and people in the back row can't hear. I did a little brief intro on you, but I'm wondering if each of you could talk a little bit more about yourselves, and in that, talk about how Harry fits into your life.
First, I met Harry when I came to the Royal School of Design in 1969. I did junior and senior year, and then by that time I was committed enough to apply to be a graduate student and did graduate work within 7172. And Henry and Arno and I were in the same class. So we have that kind of common history as well. Harry was important to me because he established in me a sense of what photography was in terms of a work ethic. When Harry wasn't in class, he was photographed obsessionally, almost to the exclusion of practically everything else. There were times where he came into class where it was quite clear that he really resented having to be in class. He was doing something, and it cut his stride a little bit. So we understood right from the beginning that photography was about working, and it wasn't about being a dilettante or being precious or careful about your work. It was about cranking the work out. And it was effectively our teacher through that kind of example, I think. Maybe others can contribute more about what he had to say in class and so on. He wasn't that effective a talker or a communicator, but he was always involved in his own work, and therefore that spread down to us.
Yeah, when I talk about, I take credit all the time for being one of Harry's students, but in fact, the truth is, I hardly had like 5 words to say in 3 years, I'd say. He wasn't a big talker anyway. And I was so intimidated by him that I just didn't you know, I didn't approach it much, but I absorbed a lot, and I heard a million stories, and I tell the stories as though they're my own, so I'm going to. And in relation to what Jim already said, and I bet Aaron's going to say it too, he was on Fresh Air. He had a show, I think his last show was talking about in Philadelphia, and Terry Gross was interviewing him. She said, Harry, I went to the show, and there were rooms and rooms of amazing work. Like, I couldn't believe it. Like, every room, there were so many pictures, so many amazing pictures. And she said, how'd you ever do that? He said, he could be very, I think, very serious and earnest, I said. He wasn't always that ironic, you know, funny. He was just trying to answer the question. And he said, well, Terry, every morning I get up and I go photograph if I can. And then in the afternoon, I do my business. I rent, teach my class, whatever. And at night I have dinner with the family. And then I go in the dark room and I develop them and I clean. And Terry, after 50 years, it just piles up. That is so true.
So many things to say about Harry, and I guess I'd love the format here would be some questions as well. I'm sure, imagine there will be. So not knowing quite where to begin to talk about Harry, but maybe to start from my point, it would be to start with the word affection. And the example that he set for a life of photography is, as he always talked about it, you could make a life of photography, seeing and observing and doing these things. And he brought that wonderful temperament into his rhythm, even as a teacher. I also felt that he was a more successful teacher, perhaps on a one-to-one basis, on an individual basis. That he knew all of our works. When he went out to see it, he had that in his mind. He wasn't just looking for good works. He was looking for, well, how does this fit into what each of us was doing? And I thought that it was as if it was his work on the wall that he was judging. So he took it very seriously. If he really liked something, he'd let you know. And if he didn't know how to tell you that. And so you learn sort of to see when he ignored something, that was really a sign that maybe it wasn't strong enough. I have some more things about that in a little while. Thoughts, I think.
Well, that was one of my questions, was about his teaching style. I know Aaron taught side by side with him, and from what I've read, they had very different styles. Aaron being the more vocal, Harry more silent and relying on cues on sign language. Could you speak to that now?
Sure. Aaron really came from a background, Aaron's sister came from a background of teaching. He'd been a school teacher. He brought this kind of ability to communicate and share ideas, along with a passion for music and reading and culture that was rich. So he brought that all into the classroom. Harry didn't have any of it. Harry had the fact that he was just on photograph. That's what I do. And he was, in some ways, a very simple kind of a man. Certainly in the way he talked and the way he the kind of cares and concerns he had, family and so on. And yet this incredible breadth and depth in his photographic work, in his art, was just amazing. So they were really very different kinds of teachers. I can tell one story about Arnold's kind of good. You probably know Arnold's work. And when we started showing work, the standard classroom day was you bring work in, you put it up on the wall. People, your student, fellow students would look at it, and Harry would look at it, and he would say something about it. That work would come down, and something else would go up. And Arnold comes in one day, and I put up a body of work of 15 mounted, consummate black and white photographs, the best I could do, a major opus of work. And Harry said something like nothing, right? Arnold's work goes up, and it's an 8x10 print, one, with about a 5x7 image on it, of Arnold stretched across a piece of ice sticking out of a bus or something, there's a hole in the ice or something. And Harry goes up and he goes, huh, that's the strangest thing I ever saw. Every 2 weeks, we look forward to Arnold because he found a new one.
I wanted to share this. I wrote this in a book called Waterline. I wrote this in a book called Waterline. And I wanted to just share. There's so much I even has a response from Harry. It says, "Dear Harry," and this is sort of what we're talking about, but it puts it in my perspective, why I made it like that. But some of the pictures in this book will be familiar to you. They were made when I was your student some 20 years ago at the Rhode Island School of Design. This book came out in 1995. And so I wrote him a letter in the book. So they were made when I was a student some 20 years ago at the Rhode Island School of Design. While most students in the class would fill the wall with pictures when it was their turn to show the work, I, as you may recall, pinned one picture on the left side of the long board, another on the right side. You walk from one end of the room to the other with a gleam in your eye for the one you liked, a kind nod at best for the one you didn't. Today I still work pretty much the same way, taking pictures one at a time, sometimes months apart. I always hope, of course, that each picture will be among the few good ones of the year, the most we can hope for, as you would say, if we are lucky. Actually, the slower pace, putting everything into that picture, became a way of working, a way of seeing. Fill the bucket to the brim, and you don't have to make many trips to the well. After that, that's what you taught us, that our way of seeing can come from our way of working, our way of living. You used to say that the good ones come early, and the pictures don't get much better after that. Remember that? That's what makes photography. I didn't understand that then, but now I can see it in my own work. The first ones seem to sum it all up. Nevertheless, on an imaginary wall of my mind, I must say, I still pin up the new pictures, ever watching for the sparkle in your eye.
Most of you know, or a lot of you know, too, that Harry and Aaron both came from Chicago, from the Institute of Design in Chicago. I actually had 3 teachers from the Institute of Design. And one was Arthur Siegel, and he was a colleague of Aaron's and Harry's. I understand it's contagious sometimes, but I didn't know that then. At any rate, I don't agree with people who say that Harry was not as good a teacher as Aaron. And I think, in some ways that's true. I mean, Aaron definitely was more extroverted and technically a better teacher, but in seeing the 3 of them all from the same school, they were very different teachers and they all had their value. Harry was, as described, I think, not that verbal and not even that much into teaching, but he was very serious about teaching, and what was said earlier was true, that he would remember pictures that I had forgotten, and I was only in school for 2 years, bio pictures. He'd say, that was like that picture you did, so-and-so, and I'm like, oh, really, and I couldn't believe he remembered them, but he had a great visual memory. And Aaron, well, an amazing teacher, an amazing guy. I had a father like Aaron, so I didn't need another one. So I came to appreciate Aaron a lot later, once I was out from under his spell. I really didn't like him as a teacher that much because he had too many opinions. And Arthur Siegel was an amazing teacher technically. He was a great lecturer, one of the smartest men I've ever run across, smartest people I've ever run across. But he was completely unapproachable. So I think that teachers have being a teacher after years and years of teaching, I think this is more and more true, that we have our values in our ways to certain students, and some more than others, and it's just a big mix, really. But I thought Aaron was an amazing teacher, but he didn't really teach, exactly. He was a bit of a savant that way, I think.
Well, in the collegial spirit, I don't want to disagree hardly with my colleagues. Harry Callahan was the most Socratic man I've ever met. He was brilliant. He was not an ideologue. He made a point of always trying to hire people who were different from himself, which is something that in the contemporary educational world is as rare as, I don't know, fresh air. He understood that the best way that a school or a department or a program ran was by good-hearted collegial contention. The problem that he ran into was that everybody who came and taught there, including Siskin, just wanted to make art, and essentially wanted to make art that was more or less like Harry's. And so that even though he brought in a fabulous journalist, a man named Bert Lever, who he hoped would bring, sort of the outside world into the sort of the 1960s internal world of art school, he brought in Richard Lebowitz, who was a very, very, very socially committed guy from a wonderful background at Harvard. But when they showed up at RISD, they just wanted to make pictures. They basically came to be like Harry. And so, and Siskind, I would argue, in many ways, was an extension of Callahan, or maybe vice versa, who knows. But my point is that actually the experience that I had with Harry was quite different. That he was somebody who was a very active teacher. He challenged you constantly. It might have been challenges of a few words, but the gauntlet was down. And he was probably the most effective teacher I ever had.
Harry, Henry, you made a statement about Arthur Siegel, and I read an interview by Arthur's wife, Irene, and she talked about the fact that there were no women followers of Harry. And here we have 4 men up on the stage here, and shame on me for not going to find Lauren Shaw. Where are you, Lauren? There she is. I'd like to invite Lauren up to the stage right now. There's a seat here for her. Come on, come on. You can do it. Lauren teaches photography at Emerson. She studied with Harry and Harry. She's been teaching for 36 years. She is the co-founder of the New England Women in Photography. You're the recipient of many awards, and you exhibit widely. And I'm aware of your body of work of Native women, what's it called? Living on the land. So I'd like to welcome Lauren to our panel. Jane Tuckerman, and Jane is on sabbatical, and of course I stopped there, so I apologize.
I've had 4 years of school. I was in trouble enough with my parents. And I had a fair amount of experience as it went in photography, and I saw the sophomore work and the junior work. I thought, I was much better than that. So I decided, I went up to Harry and I said, because the school I'd gone to, you could take a graduate class and you could talk a teacher into it. There was no structure, really, to the school. So I thought it was the same heuristic. So I said, Harry, can I take senior photography? Because I think these guys, I didn't say that, but, I think I'm up to it. And he looked over the portfolio and he said, yeah, you can, take senior photography. So I went back to the dean or who were academic people, and I said, Harry said I could be, photo 4. And they looked at me and they said, well, that means you're a senior. And so I just skipped 2 years of school. And when I did that originally, I didn't think that that's what I was doing, but actually, I did know I had a scam going at this point. I was that smart. But I was also nervous. I'd get, notices from the school that I was a sophomore, and then I'd get notices that I was a senior. And I preferred the latter, And so finally, I just decided it was the middle of the winter, and I had to know, if this was going to work out. I went to Harry and I said, I told him, I laid it out to him and everything. And he said, he said, well, I'll go talk to the dean. And I said, don't do that. I said, you know, I just love your advice on this. He said, no, I did. So I said, okay, I was really desperate. So I said, all right. So I was in the middle of giving a talk. As it turns out, I'm minor white in art history and photography class, state level class. And Harry knocks on the door, and he opens the door. He says, Harry, here. And I'm talking, you know, in the middle of it. He said, no, come here. So I went out to the hall. You know, I said, excuse me, the class. I went to the hall. And Harry said, the dean said it's okay, you can graduate. And I said, oh, thank God. I said, you know, then Harry, there was a pause, and he said, but he said, don't tell anybody. That's how I graduated. I was scared about that for risk.
That's why the work was so sophomoric.
That's right. Yeah, right.
Eleanor was like her client. She just took care of everything. She took me in. I had meals there, and then when Barbara moved to Atlanta, I was sort of this connection only because they were so close. All of them. She was the rock fan. Harry had, when he first got down there, a major show in Atlanta, and they asked 6 students to be in the show, and I've been writing back and forth, and I can't believe I'm sharing this, but I'm whole. So I went through a horrendous divorce, and it happened right at that moment. Like, I think I found out 2 days before I was going to get on a plane and go down there to Atlanta. And I didn't even pick up the phone. I wasn't even capable of picking up the phone and say, I can't show up. I'll never forget it. And, you know, I think like, I got a phone call from the museum, and that was that. And I was devastated that I couldn't be there. There was just no way. I had a letter from Eleanor about, I don't know, 6 weeks later. It's sitting on my wall in my studio from her just sharing, you know, you'll get through this. It was just, I mean, how in the world did she have time or the wherewithal to sit down and write me a letter? And, you know, so, and I went down to see her every time I could when I was going to Atlanta or otherwise. But she was just the rock. There's no question about it.
What about Emmett? What about the relationship with Emmett Gowman and Harry Callahan? You know,
It's probably better for Jim to talk about because he was from that group. Yeah.
Well, in the spirit of telling the human stories, Emmett, who was, you know, one of the dearest people in the world to me, to Jackie, has a competitive streak that doesn't show up in this Quakerly guys. But when he was in school, you know, he really needed to sort of stake out his turf. And I can remember these amazing arguments. Dick Lebowitz, Richard Lebowitz, had sort of taken charge of the idea that, okay, all you people who want to be teachers, you're going to have slides to teach with. And, you know, this was at a time when, you know, there was no art store, there was none of that stuff. There was no way you had to do everything yourself. So the idea was, okay, here we are, we've got this library, and there's books in the library, and everybody has their own books and all this stuff. So we brought in books to make slides from. And there was a table like this, and there were probably 75 books on the table, of which, let's say, somewhere between 25 and 30% were duplicates. Right? Even most people have the same books, there weren't that many books. There were these arguments about whose book had better reproductions in it. That's how petty and crazy it got. But it was also an argument that, you know, everybody was just really, really keen and believing and passionate. And Emmett, I would say, was as keen and believing and passionate as anybody. But it was an interesting time because we were all kind of flexing our muscles, and sometimes the muscle flexing got crazy and nitpicky. So to me, that was one of the most interesting aspects. I think the other thing was that Emmett was somebody who came very, very clearly to be in the aura of Harry, because of trying. As I said, so many people came to graduate school at that time, and I'm sure it's the same for all of us. So many people came to graduate school at that time from having done something else, and from deciding that was not what they wanted to do, that they wanted a life as an artist, and Harry as a photographer was the most clear role for an art life that anyone could have. So I think everybody came kind of in this sort of vampire mode to get Harry, get in the corner and fight him, and get as much of the blood as they could, and then go on with the rest of their lives. And so I think there was this really sort of wonderful dance of us all trying to suck a certain kind of energy from Harry. And Harry, knowing that he could only give so much, but wanting to give, and at the same time. And that was just a fascinating thing to observe. And I think Emmett started it off because he was the first graduate student, I think, to come with a real clear idea of what he wanted. And the other few who came in before him were kind of coming in. But he came in with a real clear idea of what he wanted and to maximize that 2 years in the best possible sense. And that really upped the ante for everybody else, which I thought was great.
Don't you think the work he did for you really came right out of it?
Oh, sure, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, his undergraduate thesis was entitled America, Alfred Stevens, and Myself.
A quick Emmett in Harry's story. Photographer Frederick Summer, who most of you, I think, was down speaking, and I don't know if you know that much about Summer, because I think he's kind of been lost a little bit over the years, maybe, but he was very hot-headed and very serious, and Emmett loved Frederick Summer, loved him. And I didn't really know Emmett because I wasn't in school with him, but when Frederick Summer came to speak, Emmett was there. And in those days, because we had cassette recorders, and he was there taping every word, and we were sitting there, and Frederick Summer spoke for 3 hours. And he was, kind of hard to understand some of the things he was getting at. And Emmett was recording everything. And I remember the tape recorder was right at the table, and it'd be like a 30-minute side or something, and he said, "Excuse me for a minute," the tape and interrupt Summer. And then at the end of it, I was kind of looking around during the time, because there was a lot of time to daydream, I have to say. So I'm looking around, and I didn't see Harry. He was kind of gone. And then Harry shows up towards the end of the talk. He comes in, and everything. He said, not sarcastically at all, I think in a genuine way. He said, "Thank you very much for coming by and sharing these thoughts. I didn't really understand much of what you said, but I'm sure everyone got a lot out of it. Thank you and everything." Everyone was just so enthusiastic.
So, Fred's in the film. Which is just amazing.
Yeah, so that's that.
And Wayne Reynolds, I don't know if you all realized who was in that film, and Jerry Uelsman is just kind of vintage. It's really amazing.
Well, everybody would kind of come in, wouldn't they? They would.
Yeah. And there would be wonderful, I remember Lisette Modell coming to Harry's house, and I came for dinner, and then and I really do think that I was, because the only woman, I kept thinking, that's why I'm doing all these things. But Lisette was there, and I have to admit, I came 2 years out of undergrad, but I really didn't know who Lisette was. I just had not seen her work. And we just totally connected, and I was doing portraits, and we were all very influenced by artists, that whole generation of us, and Gloria Plasty and all of us. And Lisette just took this liking, she just connected with me, and the next thing I knew, she, at the end of the evening, said, "Please come to New York," and she did this ballet. She was really little red lips and ballet. "You come to New York and we'll meet at the Howard Johnson." And I didn't even know who she was. It was sort of like, I knew that she was Arvis's teacher, but, this was like, it was all so new. This was like 7, I think this was 7. And then the next day, again, when seeing Harry on the street, he said, "You better go to New York and see what he said." You know, and it was those kinds of just caring, this sense of you never knew who was going to show up at the house. And I mean, Fred, we had an organization called Society for Photographic Education, and no one ever wanted to do it, but you did it, and it was a portfolio that was produced at the end of the year, and it was Harry and Aaron and graduate students and maybe some undergrads, I can't remember, but it sold out completely because it had faculty and Harry's work in it. And so your job was to organize the portfolio, and the proceeds were used to bring in guests. And you got, and people just didn't care, so you got to invite whoever you wanted. That was the deal about being the photo ed president. So my year, I invited Fred and Francis because I wanted to meet them. And again, you got to have dinner with them and so forth. Well, all through dinner, Harry was angry at Fred because when he came to the Institute of Design, all he did was make one photograph. And he kept, I mean, forever, anytime Fred's name was mentioned, Harry would say, "He came, he just made one picture," you know. But it was so loving. It was just, there was, even talking about minoring, there were lots of students that came to RISD from minors program that wanted a degree because they weren't getting a degree at MIT. And there was always a back and forth between, when you talk about Emmett in your class being competitive, it was going on with Aaron and Harry all the time. You know? Yeah, and minor, always. And it was just wonderful because there was a reverence. There was a reverence and a grace to all of it. It was never bad-mouthing, really. Harry was at the Institute of Design under Mies van der Rohe. And I remember one night asking, "So what did you learn? What was the thing from Mies van der Rohe? What was the one thing?" And I remember Harry turning and he said, he didn't say much, and referring to Mies van der Rohe, but he said one thing that I'll never forget. And it was probably the loudest voice that Harry ever spoke in. He looked at me and he said, "Werk."
I remember when, I don't know, maybe it was in 1974 when Walker Evans came. This was shortly before he passed away, but at that time it was strange. The projector was, but perhaps his experimentation was, you know, where maybe when it didn't work, he stopped it, but I think he was doing it just to find the new thing, the new next thing to do.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really important to realize about Harry is the tremendous influence that the Bauhaus had on him. And his first teaching job was with Mahoney Lodge at ID, and he always talked about that. And his assignments were, if you scratch the surface, the assignments that he gave you, certainly in photo book were Bauhaus, were all the classic Bauhaus assignments. And I think what's interesting is if you think about how between the First and Second World War, this strange idealistic organization grew up that saw technology as the savior, when there just been sort of classic proof that technology was exactly the opposite of that, and the person of the First World War. And then Harry, as somebody who did not participate in the Second World War, he had very, 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 very flat feet. He had the flattest feet ever. If you look at portraits of Harry Callahan, always look at his feet, you'll see that they're these huge, long boats. But at any rate, he was very influenced, I think. He was very much a sort of post-war person. And so this idea of technology, on the one hand, which he was very interested in, but the role of technology in that world, that he would take technology and misuse it and make art out of it and not make anything practical out of it. Harry never made anything practical in his life, in it as a gesture. I think it's very interesting to follow that thread. And it's something that I don't know if he talked about it so openly, but he certainly acknowledged it. The other thing was that Harry was a consummate technician. I mean, he understood how every single aspect of the equipment that he used worked. And if he didn't understand it, he learned it. But he never talked about it to us. I had the worst technical education ever. And I regret it in a sense, because I had to do a lot of catching up. But I think actually he would have taken a digital camera and figured out exactly how to misuse it.
I think it would be exciting.
Yeah, I think he would have loved it.
As much as he did this, experimenting, I remember Harry once saying that he had, 3 things to say, and that it was just reinventing ways of saying it again and again, and that it wasn't linear, that he would go back and he would go back to, the landscape. The pictures that he did on the Cape are very much related to the pictures in snow. And, and it was sort of comforting, even though, you look at his work and it's incredibly diverse, but it was reworking some very basic ideas that just got manifest in a variety of ways.
Yeah, the experimentation was always in service of the idea.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I just have one, I didn't have much, he never taught me anything technically, and he didn't really teach those classes when I was there, at least I don't remember teaching, but I remember one time, Gus K. Office, who was also in our class, who is very technical and was, it's very interesting. The technology, I remember one time Gus brought in a picture, and Harry said, how'd you do that? And Gus said, well, and Gus had studied minor writing, the zone system and all this. And Gus said, well, I placed the D-max at blah, 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 and, started to explain it, and Harry was listening to him. And then he said, oh, you underexposed and overdeveloped. And Gus said, yeah. And that was it. That was the conversation.
I know it's starting to get late, so I was wondering if it might be good to ask if any of you have questions for us. Yep.
I'm wondering how you've been talking about Harry and his style of teaching. I'm wondering what you've taken from him and in terms of teaching photography.
You're talking to some career teachers here, so. I think one of the things that Henry touched upon for me is crucial, is to, that thing I said earlier about Harry giving us permission to do things or to try things. I try to allow my students to do that. I don't want students to make my pictures. I want them to try to figure out how to make their pictures. It's not an easy process. It's a long, ongoing process. So I think I believe, very much in that about teaching. And then the other thing is to respect them, to allow them to understand that I value what they do and I value their effort. And it's sometimes beating them over the head when they're not working, but it's a little bit stand back and let them go a little bit. Give them the permission and then let them work it out rather than force feed them or Jim was talking about Harry never gave a lesson plan. I don't tend to give lesson plans unless I have to. So same kind of thing.
I think for me, the issue is establishing to the students that it's okay to care really deeply about something, and that's all that matters. The sort of specifics of the caring are not the issue, the degree and depth of it is. Because that was what he always made clear to us, that there was no reason to be in this business unless you really, really, really loved it, because you were going to get whacked in the face a lot. And so I think that's the most important thing for me.
I think for me it was among the things, but one is to try to know when to take a student aside individually and let them know that it's working, or even if it's not working, but to just pull them aside. Because I think Harry taught that way, and he would know when to do it. And there were critical points might have had, at least in my instruction, something where he did that and it mattered tremendously. So I look for those opportunities with my students.
Yeah, a combination of things. I think one is I try, at least, I hope not to be judgmental, you know, to let people do what they do, and if they're not going to, it's not going to work out, it's just not going to work out, and try not to make them do what you do. And but the other part is very much what Arnold said. I try at least to connect with people personally, with students, and let them know I'm available if they want to. And I'm not available if they don't want to too, you know, and I don't try to push myself on them, but just to say something personal at some point during the semester, letting them know I'm around.
Two things. One was that I also had Aaron as a teacher, and I was his teaching assistant, and that was extraordinary because he was an amazing teacher. And what I learned from Aaron was the diversity of resources coming outside of photography, stepping outside of the medium itself and bringing painting, music, literature into the classroom, which I do. At these sessions at Harry's, after 11 o'clock, Harry got very real, and he would be incredibly honest about your work, about my work. And sometimes it wasn't always favorable. And I think students want to know, they really want you to be honest. And, you know, when I was an undergrad, it was very, you know, the deal as an undergrad was because your professor made you cry. Did you cry today? It was like, it was just something that happened in art school when I was going through. It didn't happen in graduate school. But Harry was sometimes painfully honest. I mean, it didn't happen early on in the evening, but later on, and it was very real what he said. It was, you know, it wasn't a lot, but it would be very honest. And you knew it was the right thing. And it wasn't, I didn't experience meanness. I didn't experience meanness. So I feel like my students really want to know. You know, they want to know. Andrew, no? Change your mind? Okay.
Wanted to ask if any of you had thoughts you could share on the 1964 monograph, the Black Book, and what role that had, if any, in sort of your experience of Callahan's work sort of before the program. The 64, the El Mochuelo monograph, the sort of big one. What role that played in your experience of what he was about?
Well, it's interesting. I saw that book in literally within 6 months of having seeing American photographs, and I thought they were Robert Evans, and I thought they were the two most amazing examples of what a book could be. You know, the El Mochuelo book, which I don't know how many people have seen it, is probably the most beautifully printed book, photography book ever, in terms of, not even so much in terms of the rendition of the photographs, but in terms of the integrity of the way it's designed and put together, and the pictures were actually printed, double printed with a plate so that the images are inset. So it's like you're looking at a matted picture. I came from a background of graphic design, and I wasn't very good at it. But I realized that this was probably the most beautifully designed object I'd ever seen. And that somebody could treat photographs with that kind of reverence as reproductions was just astounding. So, unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it, but there you go.
It seems today to be a successful artist, you have to be an aggressive spokesperson for your own work in today's culture and so on. And I'm just wondering, from what you're saying, as a teacher, he sounded rather, well, passive isn't the right word, but not aggressive, certainly. How did he establish himself commercially, or could he be successful commercially today, do you think? What would he find the environment?
Commercially, I mean, as an artist.
I mean, as a true artist, I don't mean as...
One of the really remarkable experiences I remember was going to New York to my weeks elapsed when we were there, he never mentioned a word that he was showing us New York. Right? So we discovered that's what he was showing, or that he was in New York. It was a great, great show. So Harry, I never got the sense that he was out there aggressively pushing anything. You know, I
It's a
think
different world.
it was such a different
Yeah, just that it's a different world, you know, the stories that, I guess I never even tell stories, but I kind of know what he says anyway. And I quote Jim all the time, and one of my favorite, he thinks that the method of college, the MBA. And that's really true to a degree, because people are so career-oriented. But I don't think we were. I mean, we had something in mind, but not that kind of career.
Harry was selling photographs to students for $25. And I didn't really have money, and I was buying them from my friends. When I think about, they would say, you know, here's $25, and I mean, I did finally get one. And I mean, it was unbelievable, but, and occasionally I would hear from Eleanor, that money wasn't flowing from trees, and he wasn't, like Harry's success, Light Gallery was brand new. You know, I remember the show at the Museum of Modern Art, we all went down to the one at Eastman House, and those were like big, big deals for him, very big deals. But it wasn't, you know, it wasn't later, I mean, it was a little bit later that this huge success, the collecting, the gallery, I mean, it wasn't happening in my day on the scale that it happened later on in his life. I mean, it was long overdue, let's put it that way.
Again, spirit of full disclosure. Eleanor's sister, Dee Knapp, lived in New York and worked in publishing. And Harry was very well connected. David Stroud, who was at one point the dean of students or faculty at RISD, became the director of Hallmark Galleries, gave Harry this huge show, I think 1965, in the Hallmark Gallery in New York, which was enormous. That preceded Light Gallery by 6 or 7 years. By the time that I was a second and third years, because I did the program in 3 years, because like Henry came in having to sort of make up. But Harry didn't boot me ahead, but anyway, he knew what he was doing, and he never sold himself short in the sense of, I'm not even thinking monetarily. He never put his photographs in a situation that compromised them, and so that when the success came, it came very, very quickly because there was just this quality to the way he presented himself. But I think it was very intentional, and I think he was very knowing about it. One quick little story. I remember, I think it was a couple of years after I graduated, I had the good fortune to get a Mercedes through a loan or something. And Harry and I were both showing up at the University of Rhode Island for some event. And Harry had just bought a brand new Fox, which at that time was like the hot car, an Audi Fox. So Harry had this red Fox and I had this Mercedes. And he gets out of the car in the parking lot, and I get out of the car in the parking lot. We just happened to be there at the same time. And he walks over to me and he says, "Doing pretty good, aren't we?"
I think part of it too was, in those days there just wasn't that much to be had. It wasn't like today. And it started happening when, in the mid-70s or so. And Harry was one of the few who were on that level. And so he was able to take advantage of it. But I have a little story. I was writing when I was in school soon after, I was writing a textbook, a basic textbook on photography, and I wanted to use one of his pictures in the textbook for the cover. And I didn't know how to ask, I didn't know how it worked, and all this. The publisher told me I had to find a photograph, and I didn't have any good pictures good enough for it, So I went to Harry, there was a picture I wanted, and I broached it to him. And he said, "Oh, you can use it." And the next day, he brought in a print. And I said, "It's great, and everything." And then he said, "But I've been thinking about that." He said, "Really, the publisher should pay something for the use of the photograph. And I said, you know, it's reasonable. I didn't know how it worked. And I said, sure. I said, you know, I'll ask, but how much? And he said, you know, it doesn't really matter, but they should pay something. It's just right that they do it. And I said, okay. I was kind of, but I was nervous about it because I had to talk to this guy. I was, you know, very insecure about it. But I said, yeah, okay, I'll ask and everything. And then we're leaving, and then he turned around and he said, you know, but if it comes out of your pocket, you can just use it. But they should be paid. But if they won't, it's okay.
Couple more questions?
Just wondering what artists, not photographers, that influenced any of you?
Us or Harry?
Repeat the question, please.
I'll tell you, Harry.
Or Harry? Anybody?
Harry, Mark Rothko, Steve Reich.
Can you repeat the question? We have no.
Oh, sorry. What artists have influenced us? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And I came up with Rothko and Steve Reich, musician. I don't know, so many others. Fred Summer, certainly. Fred Summer is very influential to me. Not so much in his pictures, but what he, how he spoke and what he said, his life.
Well, there have been many, but I think this might be a useful response to your question, because when I was in school, at the time that I was studying with Harry, I got to know Walker, and it was purely by accident, mainly through a third party named Diderot, who, if you're familiar with, was a Fluxus artist who came to RISD for a couple of years and was my teacher. And the interesting thing for me was to triangulate between those three very different personalities. And that's something, going back to the question the other person asked, that's something I stress a lot to students, is try to find some pattern of really different voices that can center on you. And the benefit that you're going to take away from that is, you know, a diversity of approach. So I think that although there have been many people subsequently, including colleagues here at this table, I would say that act of sort of triangulation at the beginning was the most important thing for me.
Well, it was only later, I think, that I saw the connection to Callahan. Callahan has on my work. I didn't feel influenced by him in the beginning as much as I did by Finnish painters that I knew, and then very early on, probably Ralph Gibson. We did, unlike Jared Yule's, we used double negatives. I like Callahan's way of using double negatives because he did it in the camera and respected that maybe more in some sense. But later on, there's the other question about just some of the themes that Harry has had. I could see his influence over my work in a very, hopefully a good way.
Do you do any series like this process of shooting series that affected your work?
No, I've actually just stayed the same. I've done the same thing. Since I came up with the idea, the day I came up with the idea. Speaking about triangulation, there's a moment that just to share a teaching philosophy that I've come to believe in a lot. And in a sense, I think Harry allowed me to stay on the track that I was on. He didn't say, like when Winograd came to look at work, and he looked at an image and said to me, why don't you pick up a paintbrush, right? Harry allowed me to do what I was doing, and that's the kind of, that helped me so much. But my theory for the students is based on a model called the Helsinki bus station. It briefly says that just like the buses leaving the city, they all go in a similar direction right in the beginning. And we always hop off the bus because we find out we're doing the same thing that somebody else is doing. And we spend the rest of our career always in the Helsinki bus station platforms. So my model has always been to stay on the bus. And because the routes all diverge, they all go to different places. And you just have to work through that influence because it's going to influence you. And I always throw an expletive on this, stay on the bus in front of the bus.
Well, I do a lot of photographers. I think I was was influenced by it, but the most influential artist to me was Dolly Parton, by far. And I photographed her in 1972, and when she was just starting out, and I guess I was too. And I photographed her because Harry said I could. And I was backstage with her for an hour while I was photographing, and I asked her why she dressed like she did. Why she looked like she did, I guess. I don't know how to put it. And she looked at me, she said, honey, it's me. She said, honey, she said, people don't come out to see me looking like them.
I still come back to artists. You know, my work has wandered from portraiture, documentary, trying to find my way, and the lessons I learned from Harry and Aaron were not necessarily manifest in subject matter, but process. But in terms of dealing with the subject and engaging, I have to say it was through Lizette and then Arvis that I really feel most directly impacted. There's so many. But I also wanted just to acknowledge these folks at the table that this is really a generation. It's very different. You know, like I really feel that we did, you know, I chose to apply to Rhode Island School of Design in a corny way. I wanted a Renaissance experience. I wanted the atelier, you know, what ended up being the bar. But I wanted to be in the presence of someone great. Not because I thought it would rub off, but just to be able to see and experience the process. And I totally got what I was seeking.
Is there anyone in the audience that has a story that they'd like to share about Mary Callahan and Ben?
Not good.
Aaron, yes.
I could just guess.
And how about any question that you haven't been asked? Your last opportunity to share with the group? What do you wish was asked of you?
I have a quick question. How do you feel teaching has changed from when you were students versus now being teachers? You have more students. The process of photography has changed around entirely. You might have students with more preconceived notions of what photography is and what a photograph is. It feels very different. Your description of your classes feels very different from my experiences so far. And in a great way, not that my stuff was bad, but how do you feel teaching has changed?
How long have you got? I'm good.
Well, okay. I think it's an industry, and you know, to quote Herman Goering, but a little bit different. The famous quote: "When I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun." The quote I would make is if somebody tells you to take risks, you ask them if they've got tenure in a health plan. I think that there's a certain level of industry in art teaching now. That's the only part I can speak of in art academia. That a student should be, as one of my colleagues who's actually very young, who I'm teaching with right now, says, this class is to train you to be skeptical. And I think that students have to be skeptical now in a way that we didn't necessarily have to be. I think that's a good skill. I think it benefits one in life in general. But I'd say the important thing for us now as teachers is to develop that skeptical quality in our students, so that they look at things and don't swallow the whole, because there's so many competing agendas. You know, one of the issues with the current fiscal crisis, I mean, listen to the squealing that's coming out of Harvard, for example. The gravy train is over for a while for academia, and it may return to a certain level of simplicity that has been gyred up over the last 40 years or 30 years. So I don't know what the future holds, but I think right now it's overly complex in a level of self-serving
a level of self-service. That's a wonderful answer, because it wouldn't have occurred to me as a graduate student at RISD in the early 70s to be skeptical in any way at all. I swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. And there was no sense that there needed to be critical or negative or somehow skeptical in there at all.
The answers are really good. And I want to go back to the New York Times article that you mentioned, the Hollow Conrad. What he was talking about is that maybe this is a time of graduate program to evolve or return, in a sense, back to multiculturalism, culturalism, and in particular interdisciplinary type of courses at this time to sort of extend the range of things that would maybe change the art as well. I'm not sure, because there's also going to be a lot of demand when the economy does roll back in for pretty competitive, to be up to speed with everything we are doing. It may just be working harder, doing both. And then Emmett, in his introduction to the book, writes about process more than product, as what Harry was doing. And maybe that's something to kind of come back to in our teaching, is to bring it back to the process, and not be so self-centered with the product. Some of those thoughts.
Yeah, I just think that it's all changed so much that the way people look, and this is where I'm very skeptical too, not about what people are doing now or almost what I'm doing in a sense. We're sitting here and we're all a certain age and we're trained in a certain way. Students aren't like that now, for better and worse probably, who knows. But so I know I have a lot of opinions. But I also think that if I'm teaching or talking to a grad student, say, they're going to face a different world than I face, so I try to keep my opinions a little bit under wraps, because I'm not sure really if they're the right opinions to be expressing. I tried to talk about 5 people, recently, about 5 people out of graduate school, out of going. All of them ignored me and went. And all of them had a great time. So I've stopped trying to talk people out of it. But I will say one thing that's striking is that when we were in school, do you remember an artist statement? Do you know what the hell that was? And I remember when I had to write my first artist statement, I was about 80. And I hired a graduate student to write it for me. And it turns out I was a lot cheaper than I ever thought I was. I really had a lot to say, but
I really think I've learned from my students how to. I mean, I just think it's just such a gift. I mean, you could say, why aren't you retiring? I mean, I can say my Craft just tanked, but the truth of the matter is that I love what I do, and it's, I love the school. I'm not in an art school. I'm in a community. Emerson is a unique school. It's a school that's devoted to communication, and so I was sort of disappointed that I didn't. I was right out of graduate school. I got the job. In fact, I was competing with a former colleague, J.C., for the job at Wesleyan, and I remember he had graduated the year before, and I got a call from him saying, sorry you didn't get the job, Jay got the job, but he's waiting to hear from another school, so if he doesn't get it, it's yours. And he's still at Wesleyan. And I saw him at SPU, Society for Productive Education, a few years ago, and we both were saying that our teaching is evolved because of our students. And I have to say, I almost feel like every semester I start over. I really feel like I'm a hybrid. That's the other thing, is that I have embraced digital, but I still shoot film. But I really am a hybrid. And I just don't think I'd be the artist that I am or the teacher that I am if I didn't have the students. I really honor my students.
I got to get one piece of good news. This is good news. And that is that I teach, I've been teaching like Laura in the same place for a number of years, a couple of years, and in decades. And the significant change, I think, is that the people who say, we were in school, the people who were going to liberal arts colleges, you know, the really intellectually curious, broad-minded, rigorous people, are now going to art school because of the liberal arts colleges. There is basically very little liberal arts anymore. So that today's, in the best sense, I mean, today's studio art education is what liberal arts used to be. And if you approach it that way, it's just the most interesting damn time